Yeah, thanks, Cameron. So I think it's great to focus on multiple cases from different time frames and different centuries in Lourdes to encompass the variety of cures that we have here. So the first case that I would want to point the audience to is that of Marie Lemarchand, which is the French pronunciation, or if you want to be American or English, Marie Lemarchand. So Marie was struck with an illness that was very common back in the late 19th century and early 20th century, which was pulmonary tuberculosis, which, as you know, is bacteria that causes the lungs to get congested and bleed. And at that time, the period was almost unanimously fatal. They didn't cure it till they discovered penicillin several decades later in the 1920s and 1940s. So Marie was stricken with this in the summer of 1892. And so she felt fatigued. She grew more pale. She was coughing up blood visibly. And there were no treatments around that time that could really cure her. So her doctor considered her to be a pretty hopeless case. And over the next 3 months, from June to about August, her condition deteriorated and she was no longer really even able to walk. She was just so fatigued, didn't weigh much. And by August, the tuberculosis has spread, as it often did back in that day, to other parts of the body and caused ulceration. So there were parts that were eating away at her face, big wounds on her nose that was eating away at the cartilage, to the point where she couldn't close her mouth all the way. You could see her teeth, and very grotesque sight in that way. And what's interesting is that a famous author named Émile Zola, who was a staunch rationalist and a big critic of Lourdes, actually was there at the time when Marie was visiting Lourdes. And then Marie had gotten her doctor to sign off on a certificate where he didn't think it was a good idea for her to go to Lourdes, but he designated in, I believe it was July of 1892, that, Marie Lemarchand has the diagnosis of tuberculosis, is coughing up blood, has fragility, cannot walk, etc., etc. So Émile Zola is on the train with Marie, and he describes her condition as quite horrid in his book on Lourdes. So in his novel, Émile Zola gives Marie the designation of the name Lys Roquet, which is the pseudonym he uses. But he says, among other things, quote, "A hoarse voice growled confused words under the black veil, and at last the veil fell and the witnesses shuddered in horror. It was a case of lupus which had preyed upon the unhappy woman's nose and mouth." Lupus, by the way, is a skin disease that can sometimes be associated with tuberculosis in the sense, lupus vulgaris. He goes on to write, "Ulceration had increased and was hourly increasing. In short, all the hideous peculiarities of this disease were in full process of development, almost obliterating the traces of what was once pleasantly woman lineaments." So Zola does not paint a very pretty picture here of what it is. And so at the time that Marie Lemarchand gets to Lourdes, she's in a hopeless state. Her face is wrapped up in bandages in a veil. And for the few people who do see her actual face, they are horrified and quite frankly disgusted. So Marie goes there and is on a stretcher and prays to the Virgin Mary that she will have mercy on her and will be healed. And so as she comes out of the water, she regains use in her legs for the first time in many months, despite having significant muscle atrophy and weakness and fatigue. And as she takes the linens off, multiple witnesses, including some doctors of Lourdes who were there with other pilgrims, note that the ulceration in her face, these huge wounds that were eating away the cartilage on her face and the skin, were now healed over. They were now scarred over, and there was like bright red lines. And her skin was now a light pink, as if you just, whenever you get a cut and it heals and it's like fresh new skin, it was like that. So the skin was still discolored, but now covered in a very faint light red scar and pink skin. Now, this was obviously astounding. And the same day that this happened, the head Lourdes doctor, Gustave Boissari, president of the Lourdes Medical Bureau, comes and is showing this off. And he shows this off to Émile Zola and says, "Behold, Zola, this is the case of your dreams," right? And this was phenomenal. So Zola would go on to write about this in his book, which was published 2 years after this happened in 1894. And Zola does not deny that this happened. He says that, yes, there was a woman named Lys Roquet, and she had this horrible disfigurement in her face caused by lupus and tuberculosis, and it healed. But Zola tries to write it off as psychosomatic. Back in that day, it was common to say women were hysterical and they could write off any disease by female hysteria, that emotions could basically cause you to break out and cause ulceration, which today obviously sounds ridiculous, but back then it was commonly believed. So Zola says that she was hysterical, that this was psychosomatic.